here comes the West Indies. And when you're facing the generals, nearly every ball is a funeral. And when we battle, brother, go and put your men on the boundary line. And if you give we a liquor, that is merely a hiccup. Look, you win the little battle, you lose the war. It's the same result every time. Everybody sing, here comes the West Indies. Here comes the West Indies. Them rude boys gonna get you by degrees. Here comes the West Indies. I tell you now, here comes the West Indies. Here comes the West Indies. Them bad boys gonna bring you to your knees. Here comes the West Indies. Special request to the Trinity posse. And what about the Guyana posse? And what about the Jamaica posse?
It's the summer of 1984, and as the West Indies take to the field against England, under captain Clive Lloyd, a new world order in cricket is about to be confirmed. England's batsmen face a fearsome, fast bowling attack.
Cricket, lovely cricket. Dear me. This is how I saw it. England has tried their best, but West Indies has won the test.
Good ball. Getting out of bed, you know you're going to face Holding, Garner, Marshall. You thought, well, where do you hide?
Oh, he's gone, caught behind. Gower goes straight after T. And Garner.
Matching the ferocity of their bowlers is the awesome batting power of Vivian Richards.
But what you got here is power.
Magnificent hit. There it is, 100 for Vivian Richards and a beautiful stroke with which to bring it up.
This was more than just a series of test matches for the West Indies. Those involved knew that a special kind of pride was at stake in what they did on the pitch.
They want the West Indies team to win every match they play so that they can walk around feeling proud to be West Indians and go to their workplaces and walk in there feeling as if they are somebody and they mean something.
For West Indians, cricket has been part of a struggle to escape a history disfigured by racial conflict and the legacy of empire. When politicians have failed them, they have turned to their cricket team for a sense of nationhood. So when in 1984, Clive Lloyd's team completed an historic 5-0 series victory over England,
Underscored, it's all over.
this was the peoples of the old empire striking back in a way that all West Indians understood went beyond the boundary.
It didn't begin with Viv Richards. This thing is a long story. There's no shortcut. There's much more to West Indies cricket than just hitting a cricket ball.
I suspect Marshall has 7 wickets.
A superb exhibition.
And Sobers welcomes him with typical aggression. Leslie Hall, the world's fouls one down against England's
And what a triumph for the West Indies and their fast ball.
Cricket has been described as the glue that binds the West Indies together, creating a sense of a single West Indian identity. It is the only test-playing nation which doesn't represent one country. Consisting of 10 sovereign nations, from Jamaica in the northern Caribbean, the West Indies form an arc of islands, including Barbados and Trinidad, down to Guyana on the northeastern coast of South America.
It is very important because it's one of the few things that we do together. Although they're islands and we bring one nation together, they all have their own flags and anthems and so on. So to play under that one banner of West Indies cricket it's an exciting one, but very challenging.
There is strength in this cultural diversity, which can be seen in the way West Indians play the game.
If you start at the top of the archipelago, Jamaicans bring and Antiguans bring an aggression and a huge confident talent. As you go around, you come to Barbados and you find graft and concentration. The proper Bajan will never get himself out when the score is 25 for 4. Now a Trinidadian will hit that ball for 6. He'll either be out huge or be a huge success.
Anywhere, anytime.
But when cricket first arrived in the Caribbean in the 18th century, black West Indians were excluded from the sport. Like every aspect of society, cricket was in the grip of slavery and intended for whites only.
Black people would not have been allowed to play. However, they had a role peripherally. They would be sent to retrieve the ball from the ubiquitous cane fields. There were cane fields everywhere.
The physical strength needed to work in the cane fields meant the slaves developed a more athletic physique than their white masters, and they identified returning the cricket ball as their one chance to demonstrate this power.
They would have imposed this on themselves, as trying to throw the ball back as far as possible and as accurately as possible back to the wicketkeeper or fielder, something of the sort. As the game developed, they were called in to bowl to the white batsmen. And this now became a big challenge. That here at last, I've got a license to bowl to Massa, the man who owns me. This is one arena where I could now confront him not just as an equal, but probably even as somebody superior.
After slavery was abolished in 1834, black West Indians began to be called to play alongside whites, who needed them to make up a playing 11. By the turn of the 20th century, black and white were playing together. And in 1906, one of the first West Indian teams to visit England included black players. But the racial stereotypes which divided West Indian society also dictated the roles played on the cricket field.
The tradition of West Indies cricket spoke in terms of a division of labor on the game of play along lines of race and class. Batsmanship was seen as the art of the white player. The fast bowlers were seen almost as if they were laborers, and the young black men would be the fast bowlers and the outfielders, and that was how the game was framed.
Out of Trinidad in the 1920s emerged a cricketer who would challenge this apartheid.
Larry Constantine, Larry, I never pulled the body line. Honesty and integrity are the sum total of Sir Larry.
Larry Constantine learned to master every part of the game on Port of Spain's Savannah pitches.
Here was a man who could bat number 4, who could open the bowling and field at cover point. It was an absolute phenomenal achievement. He was a complete and all-round player.
Constantine's bowling, batting and fielding were all executed with a flair and panache which set the template for how West Indians would play the game.
He was a showman, but he represented the model for West Indies cricket. This was how we were going to play our cricket. We were going to play aggressive cricket. We were going to play creative, artistic cricket. We were going to be athletic in the field. Our fast bowlers must have long runs and must bowl quickly. And the batsmen must be very different from the British batsmen. They must be creative, play all the strokes, and they must be entertaining in the process.
Constantine was part of the West Indies team which travelled to England for their first Test match in 1928. Captained by former Army officer R.K. Noons, Constantine knew that it was inconceivable that a black West Indian could lead the team. But the West Indies were beaten 3-0, and Constantine soon began to feel that a black captain was needed for the team to progress.
Cricket in the West Indies is the most obvious example of the black man being held back. And West Indies cricket will never reach its full potential until it has a black captain.
Constantine inspired black West Indian cricketers, and in the 1930s, a specialist batsman from Jamaica surfaced. George Headley challenged the stereotype that only white players could bat at the top of the order. In 1935, Headley, batting at number 3, scored an unbeaten 270, leading the West Indies to their first ever series victory over England in the Caribbean.
He was a tremendous player, one who proved to West Indians that we do have players here who could really compare with any, and even the great Bradman, because everyone said Headley was the black Bradman. People here said no, Bradman was a white Headley, and so on. And of course, being a black Jamaican from a humble background, that made him more of an icon because the masses could identify with him.
Headley and Constantine were the first cricket heroes to black West Indians, and their achievements on...
Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to West Indies Cricket 101. Certainly on a Sunday evening, we are heading into the emancipation season, and of course, our cricket is tied up with emancipation, tied up with slavery, as you heard there. West Indies Cricket 101, our first two superstars, Larry Constantine from Trinidad, and George Headley from Jamaica. There were others, but they were the first two superstars. We heard it here on Politics 101. It all began way back there for us in 1928 when West Indies began to play Test cricket. And as you heard, Sir Larry Constantine was the first great all-rounder from the West Indies. And as the moderator said there, set the tempo for how West Indians would play our cricket. West Indies cricket beyond the boundary, CLR James, who coined that term. James and Constantine were very great friends. In fact, Constantine, as we would say, sent for James. When CLR James, young, bright scholar from Trinidad, left to go to England in the 1930s. It was Constantine. We stayed with Constantine. He helped to write Constantine's biography, and the rest is history. James himself played the game, but Constantine was far superior. And then, of course, the Atlas, as they called him, George Headley, from Jamaica. They call him Mass George. Went in, had the privilege of going into the community that he came from, and the older people will talk about Mass George. Of course, his son played for the West Indies in the 1973 series as a replacement player, Ron Headley. And then his son, Dean Headley, played for England, and so forth. So a little bit of 101 cricket there, but the man who knows this stuff better than I do, the one and only Basil Butcher Jr., is ready to roll. Basil, good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening to your viewers.
On a day when the Americans call it shellacking, and we in the West Indies, on a day when we get a good cuttass, we have to go back in time to come forward to let the young people know it was not always like this. We used to beat people up in 2 or 3 days and so on. As we get into the emancipation season, and we are reflecting there in the beginning with George Headley and Larry Constantine, and the 1920s, 1928, as we come into cricket. One can say the first phase of our cricket would be from 1928 until the war began.
1939, yes.
Yes, when the Second World War began in 1939, people like Stallmeyer were now coming in, and we lost about 8 years. Because we didn't play again until 1948.
Yes,
that's right, 9 years. And somebody like Jeff Stallmeyer, right, who they say was a stylist. You wonder if he had not lost 8 years, 9 years. Headley, Headley,
Headley was at the peak. Headley was at the peak of his powers when the war came, right?
Yeah.
And you know, when the war was over, a lot of people often credit Sir Frank Worrell as the first black captain. Indeed, it was Headley who was the first black captain for that series in 1948. But Headley got injured in the match, and that was it. And then they brought him back for another time in the early 50s. He was already past his peak at that time when he was made captain. I think he was in his late 30s, and then in his early 40s when he played in 1952 or whatever that was, So he lost some of the peak years at his heights that maybe we would have been talking more about Headley. And the West Indies team had some players that were coming on because we were a new nation in Test cricket, that maybe we would have been making more noise earlier. So I think that the war played a role in hampering the development of West Indies cricket somewhat.
Yeah, and there was talk that people like Herman Griffith and Martindale were
yes.
quick.
Because guys like Martindale, and also Headley and so on, they went and played cricket in the leagues. That's how Headley because Ron Headley, if I'm not mistaken, he was born in England.
He was born in England. That's how he ended up in
England. It's during that period, Headley playing in the leagues. Martindale, because my dad played league cricket with two of Martindale's sons. One of them was a lawyer, Fred, Uncle Fred. I knew him, but both of them, because they were born and grew up in England, and they played in the leagues in the Lancashire League. So yeah, those guys played in the leagues during that time, because I think the leagues still were playing, during the war, maybe until when they started bombing London and so on. That got stopped. Because I was fortunate to meet one Ken Bam Bam Weeks, who was on that team in 1939. There was a Jamaican guy, he had a business not far from where I lived in Brooklyn, and he was friends with one of my father's good friends. So when my father came on a vacation, we went over to the store, met the guy, and all these older Jamaican guys would come through, and one of them was Ken Bam Bam Weeks. And it was walking distance from my house. So even after my father left, I would go through there. And I remember one time Ken Bam Bam Weeks and my dad sat down, and a guy videotaped. A Jamaican doctor. I wish I could find that guy to get a copy of that video, because he said he was gonna make a copy, but we never saw it. But the two of them sat down and spoke about their experiences in the different eras, and it was very interesting to hear Bam Bam Weeks, because that was in the height of the colonial times and so on. And one of the things he was talking about, he said that off the field, the white and the black players did not socialize with each other, and he was saying that whatever little stipend he got as a player on the team, he sent pretty much all of it back to Jamaica for his wife to look after the home and so on. And Headley, being a professional cricketer, playing in the leagues, Headley used to take the black guys out to dinner and so on, and he even told this story of how we end up playing in the third test, because he played in the second test, and he was dropped for the third test. But Ivan Barrow did not want to play. He wanted to go and play the dogs, as they call it, bet on the dogs, the greyhound.
And Barrow was the wicket keeper.
Yes. So he had. This is the interesting thing. When you listen to these stories going back in West Indies cricket, you find a lot of this nepotism, friends and family, and it was almost at times seemed like club cricket, when you know how guys decide not to play and then come and play. Well, Barrow decided he wanted to go and play the Dogs, and Weeks was filled in, and he said he made a blazing 100, his only test 100 at the Oval, and the rest is history. And he also told us that him and Leslie Hilton, the famous Jamaican fastball that got hung for murdering his wife, they were the two Jamaicans on the team coming back to the Caribbean on the boat. And he said when they arrived at the port there in Kingston, nobody was there to greet them. The both of them had to jump in a taxi and go home. You know, so it showed you how different it was in that era versus even to when my dad would have played. Somebody would have been at the airport when my dad played, you know, to pick him up when he came back, or the players to pick them up when they got back to their respective territories. You know, it is even the story of in 1960 when my dad was dropped after the second test. The fourth test was played in Guyana, and he made 100 against the touring team, and then another 100 because they played 2 games in Guyana before the test. So everybody was saying Butcher coming back in the team. Clyde Walker retires and walks back into the team. So I remember when I read the story, I said to him, wait, this cricket was like club cricket. Mark could just decide and then walk straight back into the West. He said, Skipper, that's how it was in those days. You know, so, you know, it's interesting when you're able to go back and hear from those guys the conditions, the things they had to deal with in those eras. I think if people would get a more great appreciation for what these guys had to go through to make West Indies proud on the field, you know. Frank Worrell was one of the first guys to not go on a tour because he felt what the money that was given was not up to par, his value, and he didn't go on a tour. You know, these are serious stepping stones. These are the things that people had to do, and today now guys getting the fruits of the labor, and most of them that are doing that today have no clue about these players.
Have no clue. Warren's action and that by not going on that 48 tour.
Yes.
He was dubbed the cricket Bolshevik. Bolshevik after the revolutionaries in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So serious that they took it because it was the first time that a black player was standing up and saying, "You're not paying me enough."
Right.
And I'm not touring. You see, and that's a very and Worrell.
He could have been risking ever playing again for the West Indies because
that's right.
There you were a black man standing up in a colonial environment. You know what I mean? You got it. I'm sure the white people are saying this black so and so are you. They would use other words. He got some. You know, what they used to call them here in the United States, the uppity ends, you know? So he was probably seen in that light. But, you know, Worrell, you got to give Worrell a lot of credit for standing his ground and taking such a principled stand at a time when, you know, because a lot of times people take stands and they know there ain't going to be no real consequence. But he took a stand and it could have been he never would have played again for the West Indies.
That's right. And by the time Worrell dies in 1967, he is the doyen of West Indies, the gentleman, the statesman.
Oh yes,
reminds us of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh yeah, or even more so, Malcolm X.
That's right.
Because people like to revise Malcolm X's ideology because of certain statements that he may have made that were not as didn't have the same vitriol towards white people. So they felt that he changed his ideology. By no means he changed his ideology. He just used different language.
Good evening to those of you who are joining us. West Indies Cricket 101 with Basil Butcher Jr. and we are reminiscing on the early years of West Indies cricket. As those of you who are keen cricketers and who, like me and Basil, we still take the blows. You know, I got up this morning
Me too.
promptly at 6 o'clock.
Me too. I saw Forest Ball.
And turned that TV on and ready to roll, and sat there and really took it all in. But we go back in time in order to say, but we were not always like this.
Oh yeah.
And at the time of emancipation, we are coming up on the Emancipation Week, where we go back, we reflect, we remember, not to forget. In the same way with our cricket, because our cricket really grew up with slavery and colonialism and the period of post-colonialism. Sir Frank Worrell, who was that sir in 1948, see, a striking. A striking, I not going for that money that you made.
Yeah.
All right. And as we come through the 1950s, the three W's.
Yeah. And I must point out, as you talk about the 50s, he doesn't get the credit because he didn't make a lot of runs. He didn't have a good average. But to all accounts, Christiani, Robert Christiani, was a fantastically talented batsman. He was one of those batsmen. He was one of the most aesthetically pleasing batsmen.
Yeah, because they used to call him Twinkle Feet, I understand.
Yeah.
Because he would dance down the wicket like a ballet dancer.
Yeah, but because he didn't make the runs in the vein of the three W's, so a lot of people would not really know about the ability of Robert Christiani. But based on all accounts I heard about him, he was a fantastically talented player. Just did not score, and he didn't get the same amount of opportunities, obviously, but he didn't make the kind of runs like the three W's. I'm not saying he in their class, but he was a guy that, he was one of those batsmen that, you would see then. You had the Sobers and Kanai, but then you had the Butcher, the Norris, and etc. in the 60s who were just right there with them, and Robert Christiani, some would argue he had similar ability like the three W's, but it didn't pan out in runs. It's just like Carl Hooper and Brian Lara, Hooper had the same. Some would argue that Hooper had more ability than Brian Lara.
But Brian Lara argues that himself.
Exactly, but he just didn't. He didn't have the performances to match Lara. So as a result. And you know something. I just want to point this out historically. There was a guy named Chandra Paul, Guyanese Indian guy, who in the 30s scored 2 big runs. I think it was a 170 something or something like that, and another big score. And because he was Indian, he never got a look on the West Indies team. And I think he emigrated from Guyana and then went to Trinidad, and that's where he finished playing cricket in Trinidad. But that guy is a little known name. But he was a guy, maybe had he been was not Indian, if he was black or white, he may have played for the West Indies, because he had guys who make less runs played than he did.
And that's an aspect of the West Indian game that we often don't talk about. I mean, when Ramadin came into the team in 1950, he was the first East Indian to play for the West Indies. We often look at the black and white and don't look at that Indian dimension.
Correct.
Where the Indian West Indian players had a struggle to get into the team. Robert Christianity, from everything I hear from the old timers, he was in a class by himself. And I understand he had a brother, Cyril Christiani.
And from the accounts I heard about him as a wicketkeeper, it was fantastic. Here was a guy in the 30s standing up to pace bowlers, right? And he was a 6-footer plus. Because Christiani all them some tall guys. He was a 6-footer, and you know. But unfortunately for him, he died at a very young age from malaria. I think it's malaria he got and died.
Yeah,
He was
yeah,
like in
yeah.
his mid-20s. So we never got to see the best of him.
Yeah, and of course, in the opening partnership in the early 50s, Stallmeyer and Ray. And if you look at Stallmeyer's at scores and his figures, he's averaging over 40, I think 41, 42.
Yeah.
And Ray is averaging, I think, better than that. So
Yeah.
it says that they were more than average players.
Yes.
But of course, you know, Weeks, Warren, and Walcott.
They overthink everybody. You know.
Yeah. And of course, as we move into the second half of the 1950s, we come in closer to independence, and we're seeing the flowering of a new generation that includes, of course, your father and Sobers and Kanai and Hall and the set. And the point I'm trying to make here is that we are seeing, as we are struggling to become free from colonialism, the cricket is representing that struggle to be free. And as we are becoming free, we are seeing the cricket again reflected it. Because when you look at the Sobers, you look at Kanai, you look at Butcher, Norse, Wesall, you're talking about a set of cricketers with a new kind of confidence. When they go on to the cricket team, so confident that CLR James decided that he was going to go on a campaign and he was going to make the issue of West Indies captaincy political.
Yes.
He was editor of the PNM's newspaper called The Nation.
Right. Okay.
And it's from that newspaper that he launched the campaign for Warren to become captain. A black man must become captain. And he took it on. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, they put. I mean, here you had in the team, Warrell, and well, Warrell didn't go to India in 58, 59 with my dad them when Alexander took over as captain. But I would, because I think he had something to do with his school or something like that. He didn't make the tour. But you go and bring a guy who went to England, got picked out of nowhere, and went to England in 57, and then he continued in 58 against Pakistan. But because, you know, he's what we call white, he becomes captain, and you got people like Worrell and so on, guys like that are wrong. That was nonsense, you know. And they finally caught their senses when they continued with him as captain because he captained Warren in 1960 against England.
Against England, yes.
Yeah, you know, and I guess they caught their senses and they put Warren in to go to Australia. You know, they probably realized. I guess that was part of CLR James can continue his campaign for Worrell to be captain, you know. And those things, you know, when I talk to some old timers who were keen on the cricket in those days, you would always hear, particularly the West Indies teams of the 60s, they would always use the word great as an adjective for these players. Not all of them were great when you look at them statistically.
Yeah.
But why they were great is because, as one of my old-timer friends said, they put us on the map. They were the ones that, I mean, obviously we beat England in the 50s, that first time with Ramadan and Val, that series. But we really beat England in the 60s because we went there 2 times and beat them up bad.
1963 and 1966.
Yes, and that's when we coming out of trying to find our feet as newly independent nations and impending independent nations in the region. And these guys go and dealt serious blows to the quote-unquote colonial master. and make black people from the Caribbean and others could walk with their chest puff up, whether in England or anywhere else in the world, you know. So you always would hear this reverence for those players. And I've said this, and I have no fear of contradiction, that in my mind, those guys, from a political, sociological perspective, the team of the Sixers is the greatest West Indies team ever because of the environment in which they came out of and what they achieved vis-a-vis nations who were colonized and becoming independent nations and going to beat the colonial master in their place more than one time is something that lifted the spirits of Caribbean people in a way it had never been lifted before in their history.
Never lifted before. One of the persons in that team, Conrad Hunt.
Yes.
I had the pleasure of interviewing him.
I saw that interview.
Yeah. And then I had a long chat with him off the camera.
Okay.
And he felt Kanai was a superior batsman to Sobers. He felt strongly about that. The other thing, I heard Victor Benjamin say, your old man was the hardest man to get out. The first person I heard that from is Hunt, right?
Yes.
Hunt, and he put it this way. He said, when Butcher was at the other end, you could play more, take more chances.
Right.
You could play more shots because you were sure that he was not going to give it away.
Yes.
So when I heard Benjamin I had heard Hunt. And I tried to get from Hunt. And I'm asking you this because I want to know if your father ever told you. Because Hunt was vice captain to Worrell.
Yes.
And so was, and I tried to talk to Hunt about it. And
that was a sore point with him.
Yes, he kept putting me off. What your father told you about that?
No, what happened there is Worrell that go and recommended Sobers to be captain. That's why Sobers got the captaincy over Hunt, despite Hunt being Worrell's vice captain. It was Worrell that recommended Sobers. So you know, Worrell's words,
reputation is worth
serious weight. God, just to give you an example of Worrell, the stature of Worrell. When Roy Gilchrist,
yes,
he hit his wife with the iron, you know, when in England there, you know, so he get charged. He end up serving time, and at the sentencing, 3 people spoke on his behalf. The then Premier of Barbados, Grantley Adams, the then Premier of Jamaica, Norman Manley, and Frank Worrell. And the judge stated, after all 3 of them speak, I will be lenient on Mr. Gilchrist because of the words of Frank Worrell. So here we had 2 sitting premiers spoke. The judge lended more weight to Frank Worrell's words, more so than the 2 sitting premiers of the Caribbean. So that show you the kind of weight that Worrell and the respect that Worrell had in England in those years.
Yes, Hunt, he kept pushing me and I keep coming back because he retired pretty early. I think he was just about 35 when he decided to go off and do his missionary work and so on.
Armament thing, yes.
Yeah, but he had a lot more cricket in him because I think after the 1967 tour, 66-67 tour to India is when he left, and he scored reasonably well in that series.
Because I think if I'm not missing, Hunt and my father were the same age.
Yes.
I retired 2 years before, so the old boy played until 69. Hunt similarly, Norris, Hunt and the father, I mean, old boy, I think all of them is the same age.
Yes.
He's born the same year, because Norris is a few months older than the old boy. He born in May, the old boy born in September, 33. So I think Hunt is about the same age group. So the moral armament was the thing when he he retired and after the India tour. But I think they did not get the captaincy would have played a role, because I don't see him retiring and being the West Indies captain, because prestigious that was position that was.
Right.
I don't know if it has the same prestige today, because the West Indies captain in those times, and even coming on to Clive Lloyd, was on the same par with the Prime Minister in the Caribbean.
Yes.
But I don't think it has the same prestige today as it used to.
So, Mr. Butcher, we folded in 3 days.
Yes.
A session or two more than the first test. Talk to me.
Look, we again, West Indies competed up to when we had them 54 for 5. They chasing 282. We had them 54 for 5. At that point, we were ahead of the game, right? Because if we really bowl well and so on, we could bowl them out under 282. And then, as I warned some of my friends, you still got Root, the guy,
Stokes was there.
Guy,
Stokes, and the keeper boy.
Yes, as well as Wokes.
Yes.
And, well, we end up getting there two century partnerships, right? And then Wokes had a good partnership also.
Well, Wokes and the wicketkeeper had a century partnership.
Yes, as well as the wicketkeeper and Root.
Yes.
They had a centurion partnership, and that's what sank us, and the wicketkeeper batted well with the other guys, and Wokes batted well with the other guy, all the way through. Wokes get a half century, and at that point I said, when in the second innings, it can determine how long this game go. At that time, I knew we wasn't coming back. I said in the second innings, how well we bat in the second innings gonna determine the length of this game, and just as we did capitulated in the second test, the same thing happened. And then on top of that, unlike in the second test, the ball started to reverse swing, and Mark Wood was at his darndest best, reverse swinging the ball at high pace, and something our batters are not experienced with, how to combat reverse swing. They may have got an inkling about dealing with a conventional swinging ball, but now the ball swinging the opposite way than it should, and you have never dealt with this. This is a whole new ball game. Which one of the things it caused any batter, you have to keep your eyes on that ball, and play even later with the ball swinging the quote unquote reverse swing. And England just took it away from us and finished the game off in flamboyant style with Mr. Stokes, like like a T20 or 50, and knock us out of the blocks. I had no expectations for us. I don't usually have expectations with West Indies teams, especially in the longest formats and the longer format. Maybe in the T20, that's where we more think to compete. But I didn't really have that. What I was hoping to see was to see us improve from the one game to the other. We saw some sparks. Hodge batted well in the second inning. Holder batted well also, but nobody could kick on to make a big score, and to get bowled out on a pitch that was not had any devils in it on the 300 runs, you're asking for trouble.
Yes, I know you and Doc don't take me on with the selection story. I just think that something is wrong with our selectors. They're there, they're on the ground. We are outside beyond the boundary.
You talk about Mackenzie.
Why did you put? You've lost the series.
Yes.
You have South Africa in a couple of days.
Yes.
Clearly, Mackenzie's out of his depth.
Yeah.
Why do you not use this this last as to give somebody else a chance? Because you have 2 test matches coming up. Let's say they do the right thing and put Mackenzie on the bench for the two matches against South Africa. And the person that you are going to replace him with, that person could have used this test as a kind of preparation for South Africa, which could be an easier series for us. It's at home, etc., etc. Why did they continue with Mackenzie?
I try to put myself in their shoes, and I think what they looked at is that let's give this guy another shot because they feel they picked this guy rather than playing one of the guys on the bench in England. Because you got 2 reserve batters, Imlach and McCaskey, right? And in their minds, they may feel that neither of them are better than Mackenzie. That's one. 2, if they pick one or the other of those guys, and they fail miserably, and then you come back home and you may drop him for the South Africa game, would that be fair for that player, right? I mean, all of those things could have been in the thought process. I'll tell you this, what I thought. I thought they would have let Mackenzie drop one down in the order because the guy is obviously struggling with confidence and so on. So you say, look, we'll give you more breathing room between the wicket falling and come down the order. Let Atenes go up the order. Atenes got confidence and so on and so forth. And see what happens if that would help. But to put him in the same place and expect something different. I think that was that didn't make too much sense to me at all. You know, it's the whole thing of, you know, you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You know what that means, insanity, right?
Yeah.
Mackenzie did, and the thing about it, Mackenzie did on this series exactly what he did in our first class tournament playing for Jamaica. He just continued that futility that we saw in the first class season. And I think the selectors could have been a little more discerning in noting that in deciding whether to continue with Mackenzie 1 or continue with him batting at 3.
Yeah. And with all due respect to the 80-yard that Atenes made, I think he was a failure this series also. He continues to struggle with the ball just outside the off stump. And it became glaring and glaring after each innings. I understand that the board has invested in these players.
Yes.
I get that. And when you invest in people, you have to give them a run.
Correct.
But you are losing. And when you're investing in people when you are losing and they are not doing well, the two go hand in hand. So I think you need to invest in players, but you need to have a group of players that you invested and rotate them to see what happens. That would be my policy. I would not leave Mackenzie out entirely. I think he should remain in the mix. I think Atenes should remain in the mix. But put other people in the mix. You are losing. So you want to rotate to see the best combination that would come good. And rather than stay with these, because in the end you're destroying them. Cricket has to do, like any sport, with confidence. And if you are low on confidence, all right, in the end, they destroy you. So I am not saying to disinvest in these guys, but I'm saying have a pool of them and rotate them to see, the best combination. It just our bowling. Go ahead and comment on that before.
Yeah, I just want to correct myself. The name of the Indian guy was Chatterpal Prasad. That was the name of the guy. Made back in 1938. Made 174, right? I made another century. That was before the 1939 tour. And because I will argue that because he was Indian, he did not go to England in 1939, right? But yeah, the West Indies, we have to be. I don't know. I'm not outside looking in. I can't say they're not doing it because I'm not there with how they're evaluating the players. A question. The question that we are raising regarding Mackenzie is unfortunate that we don't get a chance. When they name the team the day before or something, that the press don't get a chance to interact with the coach, to ask those questions. What is the thinking in still retaining Mackenzie and so on and so forth, rather than us speculating and so on. And those are some of the things that I think Cricket West Indies remains very poor in my view when it comes to media relations. They allow too much speculation by fans who we don't have all the information. And we would like to hear the rationales for various things. But unfortunately, we got nothing regarding whether they would retain Mackenzie or not. And Mackenzie played, and he did the same thing as he's been doing since the first class season.
Our bowling, Seals far and away, our best actor. So put Seals aside. I mean, he exceeded expectations, even for a talented youngster like him. He exceeded. I think he, more than the others, adapted to the conditions in England, and that because he was playing some county cricket before.
That was part of his preparation.
Yeah, clearly he was better prepared than the others. Alzari Joseph, who I love tremendously, but if you're going for 6,
that's not good enough.
And over every innings, something is wrong.
That is not acceptable at all. Look, if you're not getting wickets, for example, you got to keep it tight. You cannot allow giveaway leak runs like that, right? Our batting is not the strength of our team. Our bowling is supposed to be the strength. So we needed to be a lot more consistent and so on. The captain spoke about it again at his post-match interview again, as he did at Trent Bridge, and West Indies. Look, we have not adjusted as a cricketing entity from bottom to up to the changed landscape of international cricket. All of our territorial boards, for example, still function similarly as when we was amateurs, going back to the colonial times. There's not much difference in the structure, right? That cannot be in this professional, high-performance world of cricket we're in today. So, there are a couple of things. World cricket today, Test cricket, when you go on tours, you do not get all of those games you used to have in bygone eras to get yourself acclimated to the place that you're playing in. So, how do you fill that vacuum and prepare your team? Now, for this tour, for example, is a double whammy. Why? Because we had a very, very inexperienced team going to probably the hardest place in the world for batters to thrive, which is England. Batters coming from overseas. And I would argue that the preparation was inadequate. We needed to be a little bit more creative. Not only if we could have gotten guys, most of those guys who were not in the T20 team, over to the UK in some form or fashion to play cricket in those conditions outside of the West Indies team. And then when we get there, and I think we should have gotten there earlier to acclimate guys more, because we always knew we were gonna be up against it in those conditions. In the best of times, teams have gone to England and struggled, right? I know you playing a one game and everybody in experience for the most part in England, and you're gonna hope to win a series. And same with the bowlers, because the bowlers gotta understand the lengths that they gotta bowl in England and so on to be successful. It's gonna be different than the lengths they bowl in Australia versus the lengths you bowl in the Caribbean. So you have to understand what lengths you need to bowl there, and understand too, you had to be very consistent. You got to be hitting those lengths over and over and over and over if you want to have a chance of beating England. And those are the things we were unable to do.
As Jason Older, has he declined as a bowler?
I think so.
Yeah.
So Holder used to be what you would say a solid third or fourth seamer in the team. I don't think he's that anymore, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he's that at all. I mean, the captain still got confidence in him because he's the one that the captain feels could bowl with most control. But today, Ben Stokes was so disdainful in the way he dismissed Holder to all parts of the field. Those are questions that got to be answered by the folks powers that be as to Holder, because you got this guy Graves. Graves is not a young guy neither. Graves is in his early 30s.
Yeah.
Graves did a decent job as a fourth seamer in Australia, and some decent. I mean, he didn't get no big scores, and his fielding, well, him and Holder, the fielding was on par. But Graves was a surprise in how accurate he bowled in Australia, and he bowled faster than Holder.
Yeah, but I take your point about Graves, but I am thinking when Kimar comes back, and I still think Thorne is ready.
Oh, you think Thorne is ready?
Well, if the batters are ready in terms of thing, I think Thorne is there and about. But anyhow,
yes,
when Kimar comes back, what's going to happen? Somebody has to. Let's say we're still going with the three fast bowlers and hold.
Well, you have just raised a very interesting point, because Mr. Roach, and the thing about it, Mr. Roach is usually his best performances in his career has been on home soil.
Yes.
Right. And we're going to be playing these two test matches on pitches that require discipline, patience, etc. Because these are two pitches you ain't blasting nobody out in Trinidad or Guyana.
Right.
As a fast bowling unit, you ain't blasting nobody out on those pitches. You have to be patient and consistent with your lines and lengths. And I could see a guy like Chase coming into the side, because one,
yes.
Sinclair is not going to play because of the hairline fracture, and you're going to play two spinners in both Trinidad and Guyana. So I could see Chase coming into the side, and that's where you would see a guy like McKenzie sitting out, and Chase fills in the middle order. Not saying he batting a three, but he comes into the middle order, and maybe somebody else, because I'm not comfortable with Holder batting at 6. Not at all.
I am not either. I am not either. So if you have the two Josephs, Seals, Holder, and Kimar, that's 5 of them. You gotta go. If you're going to play two spinners,
well, it can be a conundrum, because you see the game. Roach is in the team to play the warm-up match against South
That's
Africa.
right.
So I guess they want to see where Roach is, and that decision gonna be made based on what they see when Roach plays against South Africa in the lead up to the test match in a little bit over a week, right? So that'll be interesting to see. Dr. Hines,
yes, we gotta go. It's that hour. Thank you.
That witching hour, as they say.
The witching hour. Thank you very much, and
yes.
And I'm gonna see you next week.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And thank you all very much for staying with us another Sunday night. Our discussion on West Indies cricket. You know, we lost, but we have to keep on keeping on. We have to rally around the team. Because cricket is one of the few things that we have. I'm going to see you all next week. And for those of you who are the regular politics people, this coming week is Emancipation Week, so we may miss a couple of shows. But I'll be on tomorrow night, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. See you all.
Here comes the West Indies. And when you're facing the generals, nearly every ball is a funeral. And when we batting, brother, go and put your men on the boundary line. And if you give we a liquor, that is merely a hiccup. Look, you win the little battle, you lose the war. It's the same result every time. Everybody sing. Here comes the West Indies. Here comes the West Indies. Them rude boys gonna get you by degrees. Here come the West Indies. I'll tell you now, here come the West Indies. Here come the West Indies. Them bad boys gonna bring you to your knees. Here come the West Indies. Special request to the Trinity posse. And what about the Guyana posse?